signing up today to participate in our very first of three speaker series that will start today. And then another one will be in February and the last one in March. And that's really part of our community conversations series with regards to our comprehensive plan. Your commitment to the plan is so appreciated, and your continuous participation. We have more than 150 of you right now, and we're expecting more, so I will not take too much of your time. But you know, some of you who have been following us since we started this journey in 2018 know that we are in the phase 4 of the comprehensive plan, which is really where a lot of the draft document is out. A lot of community input is needed into really validating what we heard from you in the past, especially in the first 1 year of the plan. And so it's very important that we deliver this together. We started with it together, the journey continues with you, and we want to make sure that by the time we get to council in March for a public hearing, that we've been able to hear from different segments of the community. While we're hearing from residents, we're also hearing from developers and business people, as well as visitors, even people who are just planning professionals who don't live in Charlotte, have really taken time to weigh in on our plan. And so we appreciate how you're helping getting us to this point. I also want to reiterate that this event is not the only time you can provide comments. This is just an opportunity to learn from other leaders in the industry countrywide who can actually help us share insights into their own experiences, best practices, and how Charlotte can learn from them. So today we have our colleague who is currently with the Washington Housing Conservancy, Kimberly Driggins. She's also the former director of strategic planning and arts and culture in Detroit. She actually was also an associate director of planning in Washington, D.C. And so she's familiar with their comprehensive planning process, their regulatory process. But today she's going to be talking to us about implementation. And she's an innovative person. She's a leading practitioner. She's been in this field for many years. And she's able to provide a really good perspective for us of things that we should be thinking about as part of our comprehensive plan, but also the landmines that may be there that we need to watch out for, and to make sure that as we plan for the foreseeable future in Charlotte, that we do a really good job. Today happens to be the second day of our City Council's retreat, and part of the conversation has been about the future. We are looking at adding about 385,000 more people to our population in the city. So in another 10, 20 years, we'll be hitting the 1 million mark. And so how people move around, how they connect to jobs and housing, places to play and live is so important in this whole conversation. So you really appreciate the opportunity for every one of you to be on today. And I know that you will have a lot of questions you're going to be asking and a lot of input that you're going to be provided. If we're not able to get to your questions, if they get on the chat, I'm sure we'll get there. And this is also being recorded and will be available afterwards. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Alicia Osborne, Division Manager for Long Range and Strategic Planning, who is also being the project manager for our comprehensive plan. So Alicia, happy to be here today, and I will hang in here until I have to drop off a few minutes from now. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tyrell, and thank you all for joining us today. And I just want to take a few minutes to really express gratitude to our stakeholder group. We have 400 plus volunteers that have been our sounding board, guiding us, advising us, and quite frankly, telling us how we need to address some of the major concerns in our community. We've also had some really good support from our elected and appointed officials, and just the broader community has really been great advocates, supporters, and for this project, and also for their concerns in their neighborhood. So we're happy to continue that conversation today around this planned project, but more importantly, around how we want this document to be a living document. And what that means is that it won't sit on the shelf, and that the ideas that are within this plan will be put to action. And so we're happy today to invite my friend, my colleague, Kimberly Driggins, to share how we put those ideas into action. So just a few things, a few housekeeping things before Kimberly starts her presentation. One, we'll want to make sure that you all continue to mute your audio. You only use one source of audio, and that there will be multiple ways to participate and provide comments. Use the chat box, or when that time comes and during the Q&A session, you are able to share your comments, come off mute and share your comments as well. But what's important is that we really want to hear from Kimberly, but also hear from you, and just have a dialogue around some of the key components that are in the plan. So now we'll just turn it over to Kimberly to start the discussion. Thanks, Kimberly, for sharing your time.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. And thank you, Ty, for the warm introduction. I'm really excited to be here with you all, and really appreciate, again, Alicia, you inviting me to speak. And I do have quite a bit of experience with comprehensive plans. I definitely understand where you all are, and excited to talk to you a bit about really making sure that all of the work and all of the engagement, is really something that propels you forward. And I know, where we are. I mean, I will just say I spent 7 years in DC's Office of Planning in the position that Alicia actually holds in Charlotte. And so, it was really my responsibility. And we had just updated the comp plan. This was back in 08. We had gone through a major update and overhaul. And one of the major charges was for me and the long range citywide planning division, was about making sure that the plan was a living document, making sure that all of the work continued, and that there was strong connections to the comprehensive plan. Fast forward to 2021, and the DC Office of Planning, which I no longer work there, but they are in the midst of finalizing a major update. So they're a little bit further than you, but it's been submitted. So they've done a major update. They took the last 2 to 3 years, maybe even 4, I believe, on the update of the comp plan in DC, and it's before council. They submitted it last fall. Council is due to take action the first quarter of this year. So I'm claiming for both you and Charlotte and DC that the full adoption of both DC's comp plan and Charlotte's comprehensive plan. I'm just claiming that for you today. So, knowing that these comp plans are going to be adopted by council, let's talk about how do we keep it alive. So I'm going to share my screen. I know you're going to put questions in the chat box, and a lot of this is going to be what I did and what I was responsible for when I was in the planning department. But I will, it has relevance to today, because I think these are tools and this is advice that is still highly relevant. And I've seen other planning departments implement some of the things that we're doing. And it really also speaks to some of the intersections that I have with some of you on the phone. I recognize some of your names and faces. So with that, I'm going to launch into the presentation. Alicia, can you just remind me how long I have for the presentation?
So we have until 1:30.
Okay.
1 o'clock. 1 o'clock. So we want to do 30 minutes of Q&A.
Of Q&A. Okay, so
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I will certainly not take that long. Not it. Okay, are folks seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Great. So again, I'm going to talk about the time when I was the assistant director for citywide planning, and just so you know, the citywide planning department actually was an outgrowth of the long range planning department. When the comp plan was adopted, the first major overhaul of the comp plan back in '06, there was a decision to really rename the long range planning department to really embrace where the planning department was and where the city was around being more around focused around implementation. So the citywide planning department um, really still had stewardship of the comp plan and comp plan implementation, focused in several areas: housing, transportation, some sustainability, as well as master facilities planning and thinking about economic development strategy. So all of those things were under my purview, in addition to monitoring the comp plan. And we did a number of projects that really the comp plan had called for, but also kind of thinking about some innovation as well. So, just for folks who don't know DC's history, you obviously know the comp plan. So, it's the same as it is in your city around being the 20-year blueprint for development. A couple of things, there's the district elements, and then there's a federal element that's separate because we are the nation's capital. Um, we have future land use plan and a generalized policy map. Um, and it really, sets the stage for what we call the family of plans. And that from the comp plan, there's a lot of additional plans that all have their roots. The Department of Transportation's Move DC. There's a transportation framework or transportation element in the comp plan that was the basis for Move DC. Um, Historic preservation, they ended up doing a master plan. It had ties and elements tied back to the comp plan. We did a number of facilities plans for various agencies such as Parks and Rec. It had its roots to the comp plan. So, this is really just illustrative that, this is the tree that bears a lot of fruit, and it's the gift that keeps on giving. And that many of the sectorial plans that we've done over the years, the city, as well as specific agency plans, all have their roots to the Office of Planning's comp plan. This is just an overview of the elements that are contained, and there's some additional elements in this update that the current DC Office of Planning is working on. But these are the foundational elements. These don't change, and they still exist. And we added a racial equity lens. There was a recovery, COVID and recovery lens, and one around the environment and sustainability, that lens. Those were 3 additional lenses for this most recent update. Screens a racial equity lens as well, where there were crosswalks in those key areas with all of these citywide elements. And this is just, in the comp plan, it spells out the process for the amendment process. And, this is something that was new back in '06, but the city has more or less kept to this. And again, the city decided to do a major update, even though it was less than 12 years because the city had changed so much. So when the city started doing its update back in 2016, it was envisioned as an amendment, but it quickly evolved into a major update of its comp plan because of all the things that were going on in the city, the housing affordability issues, racial and equity started to take front and center. And so there was a need to do a bigger effort. And this is just a little bit about our process. The mayor, where we are is 3 actually, or 2. We're kind of right in, we're 2. So the mayor submitted the updates to the comp plan. The council actually has held public hearings. They held 2 public hearings back in November of 2020. And we're in the process of waiting for them to take a vote on the comp plan. Once the comp plan is voted on, there's an additional layer for us, being the nation's capital, where it goes to the National Planning Commission. in Congress. I think we're the only city that has that. Um, so, the crux of my presentation is really around, you do all this work, it's years undertaking in most cases, 2 to 3 years, and you really want this plan um, to have to resonate for years to come. And thinking about it, we think about how do we keep it alive. It's really around making sure that the agencies, the city government and county agencies are familiar and they uplift the plan, making sure that the elected officials understand the key components, and making sure that the constituency groups, the residents, um, and neighborhood organizations. And I know just from my conversations that all of these folks have been actively involved in Charlotte in the creation and the update of your plan, as in DC. And you want to keep these folks regularly updated and involved moving forward, even after its adoption. And so, keeping a plan alive, really, it's building on what got you here in the first place. The themes that your comp plan is based on, continuing to build on the constituency, focusing on the action items and the actions that are called for in the plan, making sure that the plan is reflective and it's consistent in its findings. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. Making sure that there's interagency buy-in, that there continues to be agency buy-in year after year after year, evaluation and monitoring. I'm going to spend a little bit of time really on reporting out and the progress. I mean, that's where we found in DC, where out of all the things that we did, the progress reports that we created really helped in keeping the plan um, uh, alive and front and center, and people were able to go to these progress reports and really see that there is a relationship between planning and then what happens in your city around development projects, around transportation projects, around really, anything around the built environment and the quality of life is and should be rooted in the plan. So, the themes that, have remained consistent over 15 years in the city, these themes are, I think, timeless. And this, really goes back 15 years around managing growth and change, creating successful neighborhoods, increasing access to jobs and education, connecting the city, building green and healthy communities. I mean, again, these are timeless, I think, themes. And we organized our reporting and our updating around these themes every 3 to 5 years. We report out on these themes. And, building the constituency, I mean, this is outreach. And I know that you guys have done extensive outreach. Extensive outreach was done for this most recent round. And it really is around making sure that you're connecting with all of the stakeholder groups, focusing on the actions. We have, just like your plan, a specific chapter around actions and identifying, who's responsible, showing, what the metrics are for progress. And, this implementation chapter really became key for us, and making sure that there was transparency around holding the city accountable for implementation. And this is a separate section on DC's Office of Planning website where you can see um, previous reports. I believe they used to report on it quarterly, at least when I was there. This was a quarterly effort by the planning department on all actions. And there was over 600 of them at the time, 626 to be exact. I'm sure that number is closer to 800, 900 now. And a couple of slides ago, I talked about consistency of findings. In the district, we have to make sure that the comp plan, that the capital improvement program is reflective and consistent with the comp plan, that the small area plans, which is the district's version of neighborhood plans, are consistent, like the zoning changes. So these are the things that happen in between the comp plan amendment cycles, and making sure that all of the plans, the family of plans are consistent to the comp plan, and zoning must not be inconsistent. The building ownership, there were a number of things that we did to build ownership of the plan, and these things were repeated in the current update. There was a technical advisory group. There were regular meetings to discuss citywide issues. There was an implementation program that engaged many agencies, cabinet level meetings with the directors to get buy-in, and a framework for the systems planning of many agencies. Again, and the mayor, ultimately, she, in our case, it's Mayor Bowser, champions the plan. So I know that a lot of this is work that Charlotte has done as well. Again, these are tried and true methods around successful comprehensive planning. And I know many of, Charlotte has done many of the same things. Um, I talked about the monitoring and quarterly reporting. This is what it looked like back when I was managing the process. And again, we have many more actions than 626. Um, and we met regularly. We had agency liaisons who were responsible. So in Parks and Rec, or in Department of Housing and Community Development, we had an actual person who was responsible for the items, like the comp plan action items for said agency, whether it's Department of the Environment, whether it was Department of Transportation. And Department of Transportation had a lot, had a city liaison, an agency liaison that reported out, and we convened those meetings, 20 plus agencies to report out on the progress. And we published those outcomes on the DC Office of Planning's website. In addition, we felt not just that the internal monitoring was important, and that's what I was speaking to in the last slide around interagency coordination, but it was really important to report out to the public, and to report out in a way that was digestible, newsy, interesting, and fun. So, we started a decade ago with reporting out on our progress. And, this is the first version of our progress report. And it really was a very thin read. I think this was maybe 10 pages in all. And we laid it out really like a newsletter. And we were intentional around, making, factoids, and just really making it digestible, because these are, this is thousands of pages, and I'm sure yours is thousands of pages too. But, nobody wants to go through all that. And so making it newsy, making it fun, making it interesting was really our goal, so people would actually read it. And so we were intentionally deliberate, and like the style, and using a lot of images to capture people's attention, and highlighting the work that the agencies were doing with respect to the comp plan. It's really important to recognize and praise other agencies and their mission and their accomplishment of comp plan goals. It's fundamental. The second version, we got more ambitious. This is the second version of the progress report, and this one was much more substantial document, but still an easy read. But we had a lot more to report out on. This one was still sort of built around inclusion, and from moving from vision to reality. But we had it was much more substantive, and I'll go through the components of how we laid out this. This was over 50 pages, but again, this is online currently. If you go to the DC Office of Planning's website, you go to the comp plan, you will see this full report online. And we used original photography here to really illustrate the city and highlight the city in images and words. So the comp plan progress reports, really, these were the goals. It was really around making sure that we were telling the story of implementation in a compelling and accessible manner, that we were communicating the value of planning. I think that, planners, we inherently understand the value of planning, but it's not an easy concept for most people, for residents and other government agency employees, the value proposition, but it really is, I feel it is the seat of everything around what a city does. And it's so vital that, that value proposition is understood, focusing on the tangible achievements, and educating people. It's, the comp plan, just because you do it every, I don't know, 5, 6, 10, 12, how many years you do an update, it doesn't mean that you stop talking about the comp plan. And I think that's one of the biggest things we learned in DC, is that to keep it relevant, you have to keep talking about it and keep making sure that people understand that these things just didn't happen just because, that they're rooted in a framework. And so educating people, the public, private businesses, and government officials, to keep the interest and um, to keep the accountability. So, the what how we did our progress report was really around storytelling and narratives. We really wanted to tell a story, and we linked it to current events. So what it had a very different feel from the actual comp plan itself, which is very technical typically. This again was much more relatable, for the average person. It was organized by the key themes, and we ended up with sort of a road ahead, what are the challenges and initiatives, like a look forward, because planners were always thinking about what's coming next. And so we wanted to make sure that we were um, letting the DC residents understand where we were going to be focusing our time moving forward. So the narrative, we organized it with like what we're building, what we're working, what we're learning. Those were the key elements. We use data, and we use a lot of infographics, the indicators by comp plan theme, existing sources. We produced new quantitative analysis, not just what was done for the comprehensive plan, but for the updates. We were engaged in new quantitative analysis around impact, and around what had been achieved. And we used it in I think, visually compelling manner. Data also around the status of our implementation actions. And here you're seeing kind of how we did that with pie charts and graphs. And we used a lot of images. I can't stress this enough around, when you're storytelling, this is, nothing really captures a city more than, the images of its people and the projects that you're working on. So the I think the document is beautifully done. I think it stands the test of time. I know that the planning department will be doing more progress reports, and we made it simple. So we had a key from, we focused on these initiatives and projects. We had a profile, we had a spotlight, and we had a making it happen. The making it happen was really around the agency, and calling out and recognizing agencies' achievements. Small area plan, again, that's the district's neighborhood planning efforts, and we would spotlight neighborhood plans underway. And the vision to reality profiles were specific projects that not necessarily that a agency had responsibility for, but citywide goals. So just a few illustrative examples. And again, these are all projects that have been completed now. And there's a new version of this, once our comp plan is adopted and they do the first report out for the most recent plan. But back then, we were focused on these key projects, and so we would just highlight them. Yards Park was nascent and just sort of beginning. Now it's one of the most heavily utilized parks in the city, but we called it out, and in a very real way. And the small area planning work, and the future land use map really called for that development. We connected to local projects and plans. This one is where we spotlighted what was happening in Noma, North and Massachusetts Avenue. That's the second largest business improvement district in the city. And it's really one of the areas where it's absorbing some of the city's phenomenal residential growth. So there's a lot of residential units. And this was more or less a neighborhood that didn't exist 15, 20 years ago. But again, through comprehensive planning, really called for the residential development as well as the office development of this area. If you were to visit it today, you could see the vibrancy. There are a few things that NOMA didn't call for initially, such as parks and green space, that the bid has had to address. And I think they've done a pretty good job, the Business Improvement District, over the last 5 to 7 years to create public space and green spaces in this area. And recognizing partners and partner agencies and initiatives. And again, I can't emphasize this enough that the comp plan is created with several in collaboration with all city agencies and partners, and to really recognize their work is really critical when you're reporting out. So, this is what we were looking at like 5 or 6 years ago. And it's eerie how spot on, when looking at the challenges ahead, we were 5 or 6 years ago. The city did end up, accelerating its growth. It did, we were thinking about retaining families. We know that we're a destination for young folks because of our college population and our job market. But for cities to be successful in terms of their economic base, we need to retain families. The rising housing costs, well, this just really exploded in the city, like unprecedented growth and how real housing affordability challenges. We were calling this out, and I really believe this is a planning office and planning agency's responsibility, is to really sort of call out and I don't want to say ring the alarm, but like call out ahead before it's even something that the news is talking about, what the trends are. The new workplace, back then, we were thinking about like the changing nature of work. Obviously, with the pandemic and COVID, that just really acted as an accelerant to how we think about work. And like many folks are working from home. We're never going to go back probably to everyone being in an office 5 days a week. Again, I'm sure there's going to be some type of hybrid model. Climate change, Keep DC Moving really is around transportation and complete streets policy, and really making sure that we're understanding how we're using our streets and our open space. So these are things that we called out. Again, this is 5, 6, 7 years ago when we created this. So again, I think we were pretty spot on in the trends. And so, with that, I'm going to stop sharing that presentation. I just want to kind of talk a little bit about specifically the planning department and some of the things that we did. And I want to share briefly some work that is an outgrowth um, of the citywide planning. And this is how I came to how I got to know Alicia and some of the initiatives. Our folks, and maybe Alicia, you can just say, are you seeing the new PowerPoint on the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm not going to go through all of these slides because some of them are redundant. What I want to focus on here is really, the Alicia's division, which again is something that I used to manage. And again, I talked about the evolution, but just kind of talk a little bit more about how that worked in practice and how that really also contributed to a long lasting conversation around comprehensive planning and citywide planning. So, it was established in '07. And again, I said it was formerly the Long Range Planning Division. And the key things to note here are the things that we were involved in: housing, economic development strategy, transportation, capital improvement, facilities planning, creative placemaking. And I'll talk a little bit about creative placemaking because I know that Alicia has an expertise in that area, but it's something that really didn't even exist, at least in its current form or name, 10 years ago. And that this was a division in the Office of Planning that had a lot of interaction with other government agencies by design, because it's citywide in nature. We had interactions with the agencies as well as regional planning organizations such as COG, TPB, Transportation Planning Board, WMATA, which is our regional transportation planning system. So heavy interaction externally outside of the office. These are slides that you've seen. here I want to say that, we established a capital facilities planning unit within the planning department. And it was really to make sure that we were at the table when the mayor was putting together the capital budget. We served as technical advisors on the capital budget team, and we evaluated capital projects, and we're looking for that connection. And it was, within a rubric, a scoring rubric of you got more points for the project at the time if it was something that was identified in the comprehensive plan. We supported the master facilities planning with our sister agencies, and we provided technical support. And sometimes we were the lead, and other times we provided staffing assistance, and sometimes, and in some cases, um, funding to actually get the plans done. And we did master facilities plans for the Department of Parks and Recreation, public safety, which was a constellation of agencies. We advised on the school's master facilities plan, as well as advised in libraries. Um, and this is just a sense of the Parks and Rec master plan, the public safety plan, um, that really sort of looked at more around collaboration and really efficiencies of scale with some of these agencies. And I love our public safety agencies, but they are some of the most siloed agencies within government, and they all want to have their own, training facilities. They all want to have their own, fleet where they keep their cars. I mean, we try to really incentivize sharing, like in this sector, to varying degrees of success. I won't say that we were always successful, but we were always sort of pushing them to think about what could be co-located and shared to help save resources. Um, with the economic development planning, this was really key around some key areas around retail and our retail strategy. We ended up doing some groundbreaking, award winning work around neighborhood retail in our underserved markets. So, where there wasn't development pressure in the city, this was east of the river and Anacostia and Congress Heights, and parts of Ward 5, parts of Ward 7, Deanwood, and really kind of what would it take to help catalyze investment, because retail has a very rigid set of metrics around how stores operate, or trying to attract things such as a coffee shop or things of that nature. So we did some groundbreaking work there. I'm happy to talk about that during the Q&A, and it's also available online. We ended up doing the strategy, and then we ended up doing a toolkit that really focused on implementation and really helping these neighborhood retail corridors be advocates for themselves around marketing and business attraction. And we used um, vacant retail stores to reimagine spaces and do pop-ups. And I'll talk a little bit about that. This is our work on St. Elizabeth's campus, which is now well underway in terms of a lot of the development that's happening there. um, and creative placemaking. So this was where we were very opportunistic, and I know that Charlotte has been as well. When creative placemaking and the NEA and Art Place America, which just actually sunset this past year in 2019, or they were a 10-year funding collaborative. Art Place America, the city was Washington, D.C. Office of Planning was among the first round of grantees for Art Place America. And we were able to utilize that funding because we had really called for the goals in our creative action strategy, our retail action strategy, and our small area plans. So there was an alignment with this innovative new funding that was called creative placemaking. There was an alignment with our goals that had been articulated in our comprehensive plan and subsequent studies. So we were able to hit the ground running. And I will say that the funders really liked that we had a strategy already in place, that we didn't have to create it, that we were actually implementing what we had already discussed. We had an arts and culture element in the comp plan. So we were really able to move very quickly with implementation. And it ended up becoming an area which the city became known for in the planning department. We were one of the first planning departments in the country to really have creative placemaking as a focus. And were awarded over, I mean, this number is old. At the time, it was 1.2 million. I think now it's probably closer to over $3 million in national competitive grants, including Kresge and Art Place. And so this actually became something where we had already done the work and we were looking to fund the work. And it was sometimes you have moments in your life and your career where the stars are aligned. And this was certainly one where we were able to really move the needle around how we thought about arts and culture in our public realm, in the public space, in our struggling and emerging retail corridors, to really advance goals. And so, what it'll be, in the next 5 or 10 years. I mean, I would say, a version of this. This is an example of one of the early projects, Lume Anacostia. Another project that we did around temporary street furniture, which now this is an old hat. People have been doing this around the country, but this was like 2013. This was for a planning department, a big deal. And so I think that, we helped accelerate and highlight a trend in this area in terms of design build, and really sort of taking ideas and moving them into action, and constantly ideating and being innovative in how we think about implementation. On the transportation side, this was around better coordination between transportation and land use. Transportations agencies have a lot of engineers. They're skilled in what they do. Sometimes there's a disconnect between transportation and land use, and making sure that we're leveraging infrastructure investments. And so there was a real intentionality by the planning department to really better coordinate the two. And so some of the things that we did, and this was again led by the planning department, we worked with of course, our transportation department and their planning. They have a planning unit within transportation, but we did a master land use study for streetcar planning at the time. And, we looked at economic financing study, we did a car barn substation study, system update, corridor studies. These are the things that the planning department helped with respect to transportation. Um, Housing, there's a lot to say here. I will just say that, we were on the front end around inclusionary zoning. That work has taken off. We're also on the front end of looking at the nexus between transportation and affordability, and thinking about the relationship between the two, like around quality bus or streetcar investments. Can we preserve or think about preserving affordability around our transit corridors? We were on the we were the lead in really kind of thinking about that, like in the city and in the region, and making sure that we're making catalytic housing investments and connecting them to transit access and connectivity. Again, this is like almost a decade ago, and I'm happy to say that, the planning has just intensified, and the intentionality has just intensified with the current leadership in the planning department, as well as Department of Transportation in DC. And I'm going to sort of end there because I know that I've said a lot, and I'm expecting there's probably a lot of questions in the queue. And so I want to make sure that we have ample time for a dialogue. So thank you so much for your time today. I'm going to turn it back over to Alicia.
Thank you so much, Kimberly, for sharing your experience and really sharing how we can start to put some of these ideas to action. But what I really wanted us to dive into first, just a few questions for me, and we'll open it up to the chat. Is You know, this planning process is really about looking at what's in front of us and balancing that with what's ahead. Like it's really tricky in trying to do that. And so thank you for sharing some of the ways that we can do some immediate actions and keep our eyes on the prize moving forward. So I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into how how did you guys handle in DC um, the current planning process, like the rezonings or the zoning and the current planning while you were working on this process? Because what we're experiencing in Charlotte and what we hear from our residents is that, you know, our growth has outpaced our toolbox to provide, you know, the type of development that we want to see. And so we're having enormous amount of rezonings every month, and our neighborhoods are really wanting to do community planning. But in order to make that process better, we're having to focus on the comp plan. So how did you balance that in DC? If you have any insights as to how we can do that, do a better job of that in Charlotte?
It's a great question, Alicia. And you know, I it's always a tension because I mean, you can't just wait for the comp plan to be passed. Things are happening in real time. We certainly, and this is where, I had a slide about consistency of findings. So this is sort of where if you're having to do stuff, it's a terrible analogy, but I think, as government, we have to build a plane while we're flying it. We don't have the luxury of waiting for a lot of things to happen. And so the consistency of findings. So if you're having to do, and we didn't really do spot zoning the way that some jurisdictions do spot or project zoning, but we did have to move and respond quickly. But we had to make sure that, and this is why, we have like an amendment process that is more around technical amendments, more around, so like the small area plans or the neighborhood plans, some of the spot zoning that you might had to do to get something done. It needs to sync up with the comp plan eventually. Like you can't have it be inconsistent like in perpetuity, but realizing that planning is a daily function and a daily action. But
Mhm.
we had a mechanism for technical amendments.
Right,
And those would fall under technical amendments and making
right.
sure that that's reflective and that they are syncing up. So, we definitely had to do that. I would say that we experienced phenomenal growth, at the time that I was at the planning department. It was we were far exceeding our projections. At one point, we were growing like by 1,500 residents a month. I mean, it was phenomenal growth, like in the early, um, like 2010 to 2015. Oh, I mean, that was huge. I mean, we grew by over like 40,000 residents, 50,000 residents in that time. And that's
Wow.
certainly not something that the comp plan had called for. I mean, it called for growth, but not that type of growth. And so we were crushing it regarding our population growth goals. However, what we weren't doing so well with um, was the equitable development and, kind of where that growth was happening, even though it
Mhm.
was happening in the areas that we called for the growth to happen. Sometimes an unintended consequence is you can, in the areas and the neighborhoods that were languishing, we needed to try to redirect some of that growth into some of the areas that were languishing. And I don't know if I have a great answer for how you it's almost like with real estate, when the market becomes hot, like white hot, not just red hot, but white hot, it is extremely hard to like try to um, um, cool it down. In fact, you don't really want to cool it down, but you have
Mhm.
to really make sure that you're thinking on the front end around that. And I think that the city, if I'm being reflective and honest, if we had been a bit more reflective, I don't think we understood how how um, how the city was going to take off. We wanted that to happen, but we didn't understand that how quickly that was going to happen. And
Mhm.
and being able, it's hard to respond to it on the back end. I think we tried mightily And I think we had some successes. But my time in Detroit was actually more informative because it was a weaker market city when I went. It was in a different stage of its comeback. It was just starting to come back. And there were a lot of us from DC, some folks from New Orleans, some folks from Chicago. So we understood actually, we took the lessons in those various cities, LA, and we actually applied them in the city of Detroit. So the city would be more prepared for when the market got hot, to be able to make sure that the growth was more equitable. So unfortunately, I would take some of the lessons learned in DC and apply them in Detroit, but sometimes it is a hindsight 2020.
Right.
But I do think, Charlotte is big enough where it's probably not all or nothing for you guys. I mean, you guys are bigger than we are. You can probably try to redirect if you need to, where some of that growth is. So you might have an easier time. I mean, the city is, 64, 68 square miles. We're really pretty small with respect to our geographical size. So I'm going to pause there. I know
Yeah.
I went on and on. So
No, that's fine. I'm glad you brought up your work around equitable development in Detroit, because equity has been the foundation of this comp plan. We heard that loud and clear from our residents, from our community, from our businesses, that we can't grow and develop like we used to. We have to do something different. So there's a key part of this plan that actually talks about and lays out an equitable growth framework. And a couple of things that it's envisioned to do is, to your point, make sure that the cost and benefits of investments in the future are distributed equitably around our community, and seeking to overinvest in those areas that have been traditionally underinvested in over time. And so there's metrics that assigns numbers to the narrative and makes us smarter about how we move forward. Can you talk a little bit about some of your equitable development tools? Because what we have in the plan also is establishing a vulnerability to displacement overlay. So we
mm,
can put those measures in place and programs and projects to help mitigate displacement due to gentrification. So I know in Detroit you had the community benefits agreement. That was one of those equitable tools. We're proposing that in our plan. What else? Talk a little bit about that one in particular, how that worked in Detroit, and if there are other tools that we can explore to help, propel us in our goal to be more equitable in Charlotte.
great question. Again, you're not going easy on me today.
Oh no, we're
So
going in.
you're
You had
going
to check the
in.
chat box.
Yeah. So yeah. So the community benefits ordinance was really, so Detroit was a really different situation.
Yeah.
And you'll have to have me back and I can talk to you about Detroit. But like one of the big things there was they didn't have the strong culture of planning that DC has. And they didn't actually have the infrastructure around engagement, around resident engagement on like large scale development projects. So the community benefit ordinance, as the name would suggest, was really created to make sure that residents were benefiting from the development that was about to take off in Detroit, right? Like when you're in a city where there has been slow to no growth, it's not really an issue. But the mayor has done an outstanding job post um, recovery in Detroit with incentivizing development and growth. To his credit, so it was a good problem for Detroit to be thinking about growth and growth on a large scale, and really wanting to make sure that residents were able that the city was being responsive to the needs and the desires of residents around what that growth, what the benefits of that growth or that development. I should really say development. The community benefits ordinance is really around development projects of a certain size. I don't remember the dollar amount, but there's a threshold that triggers the community benefits agreement, right? It's not for just every development that the city does. It's of a certain amount, of a certain size.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a process in which the planning department leads, with the residents and the developer, that really defines what those benefits will be. I know that it had some levels of success. I know that the council was interested in tweaking the benefits agreement. I think that when you start out, I'll just say with planning, and I think that most cities are doing this, is that you can start out with something, but never be afraid to revisit it quickly to make sure that it's working. I mean, my advice is, to make sure that you're flexible and nimble to be able to make changes to improve the process. I always say we always reserve the right to get smarter. And sometimes you don't know what needs to be tinkered with till you actually implement the thing and realize that, oh, it's better if we do it this way, or maybe the threshold needs to be lower because it's more projects are happening. So that's some of the type, of work that we did. Other tools that Detroit used, Detroit and southeastern Michigan is blessed to have, a very large philanthropic community. And so, the I would say philanthropy is really the third-legged stool in Detroit and southeastern Michigan. A lot of the projects, moved from planning to implementation because the city created a strategic neighborhood fund. So that strategic neighborhood fund supported the implementation of the strategic neighborhood plans. So the neighborhood planning that the city was doing, we were able to move quickly from planning to implementation because of the strategic neighborhood fund. And that fund was, many of the top, um, foundations in the area, some national ones, but mainly local, but some national ones like Ford and Knight, um, invested. And that was a game changer. And there were equity goals in the neighborhood plans that were tied to the funding. So there's no bigger carrot or stick than having those equity goals tied to, a funding stream and the accountability. And so that's another, tool if you're so fortunate to have, a philanthropy investing, in projects, is to make sure that they're that it's codified in the relationships. A third, I would say, and it's something near and dear, and I call it the secret sauce. It's really, arts and culture, equitable development. If you're talking about housing, transportation systems, I mean, there's nothing that reflect that you want to see your culture and reflected in the development, and not just in a symbolic way, but you can do it around the process and how you design something. Having artists involved, in the design of a project is really important. Understanding sort of the end user resident engagement. Um, I find um, I found, that there's nothing. Arts and culture is a uniter in a city, and it actually helps with, some of the difficult conversations, and also thinking about the culture, whether it's, in a Latinx community, whether it's an African American community, whether it's in a Polish or Italian community. I mean, whatever. Like, what is the culture? What makes a place unique? What signals that this development is for you, is actually, um, arts and culture, like in a project. And we did that, with public space, with streetscape design, with open space, with catalytic, outdoor projects like Spirit Plaza in Detroit, with the waterfront, riverfront rather. All along those projects, you will see a major investment with the, Greenway that's underway, the Joe Louis Greenway, which I can't even remember what the original name was, but was it was renamed Joe Louis because of his, relationship to the city. And, we worked with, renowned, landscape, architect Walter Hood to design, public art, along that greenway. And that greenway, by the way, is going to be bigger than Atlanta's Beltline project. I mean, that's how big
Wow.
this greenway is going to be. And, this wasn't an afterthought. You have to incorporate arts and culture actually into the planning and design, and not just stick it in after the thing is built, for it to actually resonate. So, I can go on and wax poetic about arts and culture, but like moving on, affordable housing. The last thing I'll say is, the city of Detroit, and every development, there's an affordable housing component requirement. That's actually incredibly hard to do, but part of how the city's able to achieve that is because of the Strategic Neighborhood Fund. Because in some of these areas, the market, um, there's the subsidy is so great for affordable housing in any city to make affordable housing deals work. Um, um, it often requires like above and beyond what government actually has access to. And in Detroit, the foundations really stepped up to make sure that like the new housing projects being developed had ample levels of affordability in them. So I'll just end there with those tools.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. And now we'll start to take some questions from the chat. I've been monitoring it, but my colleague and also the deputy project manager for the comp plan, Kathy Cornett, has been keeping an eye on it. So we'll turn it over to Kathy to walk us through those questions. Thanks.
Thank you. And I just want to mention to everyone that we are recording this. So, and we're saving all of the chat comments. So for today's conversation, some of these comments are more specific to our particular jurisdiction. And so I'll frame them in a way that Kimberly can talk about them from her experience. But I just want to assure you that we do have all of the questions, and we can develop responses to any of those that we're not able to get to today. So Kimberly, there's several questions in here around community engagement, specifically community engagement, like keeping people motivated from constituents groups, and also keeping that motivation and having groups that represent the general population. So from that end, and then also from the side of when your plan went through review and adoption, which is the phase we're in now. If you could talk a little bit about what community engagement looked like for you all in that sense.
Sure. So that is ongoing, and it was multifaceted. And, there were a number of things that we did. First and foremost, we had like office hours, and they were drop-in office hours. So we had them not only and this was obviously prior to COVID, but when we were able to meet in person, but we had drop-in office hours, almost like you would have, at a university. So anyone who wanted to engage about the comprehensive plan, didn't have to set up an appointment. They could stop by the office. Um, um, we also met people where they were out in the community. So we held those office hours in all 8 of our wards. And so we did that for a number of months while it was going through the stage that you're at now, to make sure that after the kind of formal planning was done and people had questions, that we were that we were available to answer them. We also, after the comp plan's adoption, um, we the biggest thing was really around implementing the kind of low hanging fruit and showing people that this wasn't just like all of your hours and all the blood, sweat, and tears to kind of get us to this point. It wasn't going to take, years. And I mean, it does take years for like big catalytic projects to come online, but there's some smaller projects that can come online a lot faster. So there was an intentionality around some of the low hanging fruit to show success and progress quickly, and to really be promoting that and engaging residents around that. So around engagement, I think seeing early stage implementation is actually really important with community engagement. It helps residents connect the dots, business folks connect the dots around that their voice matters and it's being heard and it actually leads to something getting done. I think all of us has experienced planning fatigue. No doubt a lot of you probably have it. Um, I just saw an example of the quick wins. I mean, for us, this was around our temporary urbanism program and activating vacant and underutilized space in our underserved communities. That was something we were able to do because we had a grant from Art Place America to do that. And it actually helped lease up the space a lot faster than if those buildings had stayed vacant and unoccupied. And so that was an example of something of a quick win. And we were able to actually shift resources um, with our small business, our local small business development to kind of help these corridors a bit quicker. So that's an example. Um, I lost my train of thought, so I'm gonna kick it back over to you, Kathy.
Thanks. Okay, thank you very much. So there was several questions generally asking about interagency coordination and alignment, specifically regarding capital financing, capital improvements, budgeting, all of those kinds of things. And then I don't know if that gives you the opportunity to just expand a little bit more on the capital improvements program and facilities team that you referred to earlier. I don't know if that's something you can expand upon a little bit, your experiences with that.
Okay, I'll try. So, with respect to capital budgeting and finance, I mean, again, I'm not exactly sure how the city of Charlotte is set up, but um, there was a disconnect. We didn't actually have that function in the planning department, like when I arrived. So most planning departments actually have it, or maybe it's a little bit underutilized. The district didn't actually have it. I mean, we called for it in the comp plan, but we actually didn't have like a unit. So, you know, in my department, which is Alicia's department, we had a CIP. We created a mini division within my unit, or a unit, I should say, within my division to kind of really focus on that. And so, really, again, resources around staffing and then helping other agencies who were understaffed. I mean, long range planning, I mean, outside of Department of Transportation and other agencies, that's most frontline agencies like housing, community development, it's really putting out the fires of the day. It is very hard sometimes to think about the long range needs. And so we were very proactive in becoming sort of, we shopped our services to agencies around planning, especially where we saw where it met the comp plan goals and there were resource issues in other agencies. We were able to staff up, or in some instances just redirect existing staff to help those agencies. Um, Also, with respect to the capital budgeting and finance, not only did we become sort of advisors or mini consultants to other agencies, with respect to the mayor's budget process, we were providing the data. We were providing, making sure that we had a seat at the table with the budget negotiations. If you don't have that, you should really advocate to be there, because only you can best advocate and remind folks, of what has transpired, but also sort of what's been called for. So we had an actual seat at the budget review team and helping develop the mayor's capital budget, and that proved to be instrumental. And we worked with the budget office. We worked with in DC. There's uh, it was divided by cluster agencies, and there was like 4 different deputy mayors. So you had a deputy mayor for public safety. So they have, working with that group, deputy mayor for planning and economic development, working with that group, deputy mayor for health and human services, and deputy mayor for education. So we were able to be successful in that regard.
Thanks very much. So change direction a little bit. There was a comment about, several comments about how wonderful and clear your materials are, and great graphics, and great content, and all of those kinds of things. And there's a question about, on our end, we've been working with MIG's consulting office out of Denver and helping us develop our comprehensive plan. Can you talk about a little bit about in DC, was that all done in-house, or did you work with a consultant? Some of those things.
Yeah, no, we definitely worked with a consultant, and I have to actually go back to the materials to get the list of consultants, but I can actually provide them. Or if you go to the DC government, to Office of Planning's website, I know that the comp plan progress report that I referenced is online. You'll see the consultants listed there. You'll see also on the comp plan, this current version, there's even better graphics because the planning department just keeps getting better. You'll see the list of consultants that helped with this most recent comp plan update as well. But yeah, we definitely did not do that in-house. I think that we had some capability to do that, but the speed and the responsiveness, we thought it was better to contract it out. But it was heavily guided by the vision. Consultants are only as good as the people that are managing them. So like being really clear about what you're looking for certainly helps improve the end product.
Thank you. So we'll just do a couple more. Of course, we talked a lot about growth and development pressure, and there's a question about tools that you might have used to mitigate gentrification, and maybe how successful, or any lessons learned from any of that type of work.
So, talked about the tools that we were using in Detroit, and I think that that's still playing out. It's hard to extract lessons learned. I think in DC, this time around with the comp plan update, one of the big focus areas was housing and housing affordability. And it actually ties directly to what I'm doing right now. But what I'll say is, the mayor ended up doing a housing equity report during the comp plan update. It was a separate report, and it really called for affordable housing in all 8 wards. And so the housing equity became a conversation about the systemic racism in housing and US housing policy, and how oftentimes low income housing or affordable housing is clustered where the dirt is the cheapest. And I think that's in every US city. That's where you see the affordable housing. It's where the land is the cheapest, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's where it should be. And so, one of the things around equitable development and around housing that I think is really, I haven't seen a report like this in any other city. I'm not saying that it doesn't exist, but that housing equity report that the planning department did along with the Department of Housing and Community Development, to me, is one of the best documents around the call for housing equity, to have it in the most expensive parts of our city. And how do you achieve that? It's very hard to do. And it calls for a range of public-private partnerships, inclusionary zoning, looking at different ways in which to get housing affordability. And there's a NIMBYism, not in my own backyard. And, we certainly have that in certain parts of the city. And so that housing equity report, where it calls for units of housing in all 8 wards, and it quantifies how much. And we're working on that as we speak, the mayor's affordable housing goals. I think that's really groundbreaking. And I think that that's certainly a result of some of the things that we saw the past decade, where, and even like, our citizens in wards 7 and 8 were like, why is all the affordable housing like here? Like it should be throughout the city. And like, we really listened to that. And so, and having more of an equal distribution of where the affordability is something that I would encourage Charlotte to really think about, because I would imagine most of your affordable housing is new construction. and it's ground up and where that is, and making sure that that is and all like in high opportunity neighborhoods, where there are good schools, where there's access to fresh and healthy food, where there's access to quality transit. You need affordability in all parts of your city, especially in your high opportunity neighborhoods. And that's the most expensive housing to produce. So I mean, it's going to be a challenge, but I'm challenging you all to think about that.
Thank you. So for the final two, I'll kind of pair up two. One is, do you have any example quick wins? And then the other is, we have throughout our public engagement that we've done in the past couple of years with this plan, always parks and recreation, parks and greenways rises to the top as a very important issue. And similar to one of the earlier slides that you showed, our Park and Recreation Department is a county agency, and they're simultaneously doing a MEC playbook, and we're coordinating with them. But I think there were some questions around alternative funding measures for park and recreation, or if you have any examples of anything like that you've done in your work, or does it align with the community benefits agreement in any way, anything like that?
Sure. I'm going to do the last question first, because I thought I had talked about quick wins a few minutes ago when I was talking about the temporary urbanism and like our vacant retail strategy. So as an example of a quick win, because we had a grant to do it. Regarding financing of parks and greenways and public space, it's always a challenge. I think, really thinking about philanthropy there is really helpful. I know that the Knight Foundation is in Charlotte. I do know that public space is a focus. You, of course, can't rely on one foundation to get you there. But I think you have to think about, philanthropy. And in this case, I know Bank of America is headquartered, not just philanthropy in terms of foundations, but corporate philanthropy and CSR, corporate social responsibility. And, where, and this is where I sit nationally on the boards of Project for Public Space. Like this whole conversation, there's a value proposition to be made to the private sector around a lot of your planning goals. And they are under tremendous amount of pressure right now to really be better neighbors in the cities in which they reside. I would say that there is a value proposition around green space, public space to be made with respect to funding with this sector. And it's not just on their campuses, but actually having them fund projects and initiatives in the neighborhoods. Part of the Strategic Neighborhood Fund in Detroit that I talked about, one category is green space. Another category is streetscape, public space improvements. We had 4 catalytic categories, 2 of which one was public space and public realm. And so I think that you have to, explicitly make the ask. I think you actually specifically have to craft the value proposition. And because these are things that attract workers, these are the things that enhance quality of life. These are the things that workers and residents really value. So, I always take on funding challenges almost with glee, because I actually think that there's a lot of funding out there. You really have to just think about where the funding is and making those relationships and having someone in government thinking about those external relationships. Having worked in government 15 years total, I know how difficult it is to keep your head up and not always be focused on the day-to-day and constituencies, and your constituency meaning residents, but you need someone or a group within government that's all about external relations. It's all actually about fundraising. In the city of Detroit, they had a chief development officer, and not development in terms of bricks and mortar, but around fundraising. And that was a pivotal position in the city of Detroit, and largely responsible for the creation of the Strategic Neighborhood Fund. We had that idea. The planning department did its job around developing the neighborhood revitalization plans, but the chief development officer was responsible for the fundraising campaign to fund that. And he was very successful. And I would dare say, he was one of the most influential and important members of the mayor's cabinet at the time. So I think that, the money is out there. I think you have to think public-private partnerships. I know that there's sometimes issues around stewardship and maintenance, and I'm not saying that those aren't real issues, but I just believe things can be solved for when you put collective minds to it.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Alicia, I think I'll turn it back over to you now.
Yeah, we're almost at time. So thank you all for joining us today, and we want to encourage you to join our future conversations about the plan and how we can best realize a lot of those ideas, learning from others across the country who've done it before and can definitely share some successes and some challenges. So thank you again, Kimberly, for joining us today. We talked over the holidays about this, and you said yes without hesitating, because I know that deep down in your heart, this work means a lot to you, and we really appreciate you sharing your experiences. So in the future, we'll have these types of conversations every Tuesday between 9 and March, as Ty mentioned at the beginning. Our next speaker is Charles Hales. He's the former mayor of Portland. And then we also have Paul Magoosh, and we'll send out those dates and times and make sure that everyone is available to join. And also we encourage you to share with your neighbors and your friends. A quick note about the draft plan document. Next slide. We did share, the document became available to the public in October during our community drive-in meeting. And here are a couple of ways to review the document and actually see what's in it. We talked a lot about that today, but if you want to visit the version we have online on our website at charlottefuture2040.com, you can also print from that website if you just want to print a couple of pages and actually fill the document. I know some of us really like to do that with my books. I want to fill the pages. And also they're available at 19 libraries across the city. So if you want to just sit down and take your time and really look through the document, and for those who don't have access to the internet, it's available in 19 locations around town, particularly at our main library uptown. So here's how you comment on the document. As Ty mentioned, we're in phase 4 of this process, and feedback and commenting are welcome. This is not a done deal. We're still baking it out, and we need your feedback. So again, you can go to our website. There's a feature on the document to place your comments directly on each page. So as you're reading, you can look at the document and provide your comments. If you do not want to do that, you can just send us an email requesting a form to fill out, and you can send that back via mail if you just want to do that. You can also just email it to your comments directly to us at charlottefuture2040@charlottenc.gov. Or if you are visually impaired and you just want to make a phone call and you don't want to use the internet at all, you can dial 311, and one of our colleagues in that department will take your comments down and make sure that we receive them. Next slide. At any rate, again, I'm Alicia Osborne, the project manager. Kathy Cornett's the deputy project manager. Email us. We are having these community conversations, not just in this forum with a speaker, but if you would like for us to come to your neighborhood or to your organization or your business to share about the plan, please feel free to send us an email at charlottefuturenc.gov or send it directly to Kathy or myself. And also just visit the project website sign up for our email list, and you'll get updates about events like this and other outreach opportunities. Again, thank you so much for participating today. We will send out an email with the responses to those questions that were provided in the chat, and also place those on our website. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.